Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is your co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, shorts, videos, all that stuff. We've really been zooming through these teams, and if you're new here, we have been covering all NBA teams in their offseason so far. And currently we're in the Northwest Division, so if you missed your, your favorite team, you can easily go back and rewatch our videos from the past month. And with that being said, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and X at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yes. So now we will be covering our next team in the Northwest Division, and that's the Utah Jazz.
Yep.
So the Utah Jazz, it's kind of funny because last season there were pretty much no expectations for the team, right? They had traded Donovan Mitchell, they had traded Rudy Gobert, right? We've talked about both of those trades, in pretty detailed fashion.
Sure.
And so it was pretty clear that they were obviously headed towards a rebuild, right? And then they made even more trades right after that, right? They traded Bojan Bogdanovic, right? They traded him to Detroit,
Yeah.
basically for Kelly Olynyk. And then of course, going into that season, right, they were tied a lot, to rumors surrounding Russell Westbrook and the Lakers. They had swapped Patrick Beverley and Taylor Horton Tucker, right? Patrick Beverley they got in the Gobert trade, and so um, going into the season, we kind of assumed they were going to be absolutely horrible, right?
Sure.
Competing for, Victor Wembanyama. But as it turned out, they actually were, for a decent chunk of the year, a pretty competitive team. They started off the year, right, as one of the top teams in the Western Conference, right? And we knew it wouldn't last. And we were kind of just waiting for them to eventually kind of just collapse and fall apart. But it didn't really happen, until towards the end of the season once they just stopped playing guys, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Laurie Markkinen, right, who they traded for from Cleveland, right? He ended up having, a great season, right? Basically being most improved, right? All NBA caliber player, right? Averaged 26 a game, 8.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 39% from three, 50% from the field. So he had a great season last year, right? Kind of showing, you know, um, that he's a lot better than what people gave him credit for, right? Because
Sure.
he came into the league right as a solid player for Chicago, right? But he it kind of felt like he didn't really pan out the way you would have liked, and then he went to Cleveland and played relatively well for the Cavs with that weird three big lineup that they had, and then he went to Utah, and now a lot more aspects of his game you can see with the ball handling. He spent a lot of time at the three, right? Whereas like for most of his career, you kind of assumed he was more like a four.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then you had a number of other guys play well, right? Jordan Clarkson, right, had a great season for the most part, right? 20 a
Yep.
game, was actually a starter, right? When the last several seasons he had been more of like a six-man guy. So you had a lot of guys play really well, right? Kelly Olynyk had a strong season, right? Colin Sexton had a solid season. Even guys like Chris Dunn, right, who they signed relatively late, right, kind of stepped in. And then they made the trade at the deadline, right, where they sent out a bunch of their guys, like Jerry Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, and others, right? And they brought in, a lot of the Lakers reserve players.
Right.
They sent Mike Conley to Minnesota, right? So they ended up sending even more guys out, and they were still competing for that
Yeah,
final.
they were.
Yeah, exactly. But eventually, like I said, they just kind of gave up. And they finished the season 37-45. Basically good for like what 11th or so in the Western Conference.
Yeah, it was
11,
about
12.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, 12th.
Yes,
So
12th to be
it,
exact.
yeah, they also had a rookie head coach last year, Will Hardy, right, who was an assistant in Boston. He did a really good job, taking a lot of the guys they had with the roster and pretty much getting about as good as you could have gotten out of the roster. Right? I mean, they were basically a little under 500, and that's with a number of their guys missing a lot of games, right? Because again, Laurie Markkinen, right, missed 16 games.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Clarkson missed about 20 games. Colin Sexton, I think I think he missed like half the season or something, right?
I
Yeah,
think you're correct.
yeah, exactly. He played in I think about 48 games. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he missed a lot of time. Um, so considering all of that, right? They had a solid season, and then going into the offseason, right? We were kind of wondering what they would do. They were a team that had a decent amount of cap space. You kind of wondered maybe they might be somebody who might just overpay for somebody.
Sure.
They ended up not doing that, right? They ended up just being a team that was kind of like just trading for and bringing in contracts, right? They traded for John Collins, right, from Atlanta, who we liked as a player, but didn't really have a great season last year, right? Spent a decent amount of time injured, and when he was playing, also didn't really play well. Um, so he underperformed, but now he's in Utah. So now he's going to have another opportunity, right? To have another solid role in there. But he steps into that three big lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So that's going to be pretty intriguing just to see how he fits in there, right? Because he's a very different player, I think, from Olynyk. Olynyk is
Extremely.
more like just like a normal, uh, solid passer,
Yeah.
whereas like Collins is more like a roll man. Even though he can shoot, but he didn't shoot very well last year. Doesn't really do a whole lot of playmaking, right? Just more of like a typical scoring big.
Right.
Um, they also drafted some guys, right? They drafted Taylor Hendricks with their lottery pick. Again, he was a guy that I think we had, valued relatively high in the draft. Both of us, I think, had him, ranked pretty well,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in our mock draft.
Yes.
They also drafted Keontae George, right, who was a guard. And he's, I believe he's a little bit older, right, for a rookie, but still, um, you know, well, no, he's 19. Whoops.
I mean,
So
there was
he's,
some reclassification. That's
yeah,
what happened. He reclassified.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but he's almost 20. I
Yes.
think, yeah, exactly. So he's gonna be 20 when the season starts, but yeah, not as old as I thought.
Yeah.
But regardless, like you said, despite the reclassification, he was a guy that I think people were kind of some people were in on, some people weren't as high on. But in the summer league, he played great. He was one of the best players in the summer league. We went there, we saw it. Again, if you haven't seen it yet, you can
Please check
still
it
check
out.
out
It's a
yeah, you
vibe.
can
I think you
check out
guys would like it.
yeah, you can still check out our summer league blog or vlog, excuse me. So
Yeah.
I mean, they made a decent amount of moves. They also sent some guys packing right again in that John Collins trade. They sent out Rudy Gay. But for the most part, I believe they also drafted Bryce Sensabaugh, right? So more of a scoring type. So they
Mm-hmm.
drafted some guys. They traded for Collins, right? But free agency wise, right? Once they did that, you knew they probably weren't going to do a whole lot. They extended Jordan Clarkson, gave him a longer term deal, right? So he's gonna, be there, well, potentially be there for a little while unless they trade him. And again, he had a really good season, so they're rewarding him for that play.
Yep.
Um, but regardless, I guess, when we look at the rotation, I think it's going to be kind of intriguing, because again, now Colin Sexton, I think, kind of steps into the starting point guard role full time, right? Because before it was Conley, before he was traded, and then Chris Dunn, I guess, is kind of the backup. And then Jordan Clarkson, assuming they still start him, right? He's this other starting guard, right? And then behind him, Taylor Horton Tucker, Keontae George. And then, with Laurie Markkinen, he's kind of your wing right behind him, probably Ochai Agbaji. And then other guys, Bryce Sensabaugh, Simone Fontecchio, right? Some of these guys were guys that played late last year.
Yeah.
And then at that four spot, right? John Collins, Taylor Hendricks, right? Kelly Olynyk, Luka Samanic, and then at that center spot, Walker Kessler, right? That was another guy who we hadn't mentioned yet, right? He also came over in that Gobert trade, right? That was a guy that Minnesota had drafted. Um,
Yep.
and then, yeah, like I mentioned, they sent him over, and he had a really strong rookie season, right? 9 points, 8 rebounds, over 2 blocks a game.
Great
Um,
player.
yeah, exactly. 72% from the field, right? So, you know, uh, didn't really space the floor a whole lot, right? 33% from three, but on incredibly limited attempts, right? But it'll be interesting to see if he expands that part of his game. But regardless, it was interesting because he was kind of looked at, last season when he was playing, right, as sort of like the Rudy Gobert replacement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, Gobert in Utah, right? A lot of Utah, people valued him because of his shot blocking, because of the pick and roll game, right? Which led to some pretty efficient offense. But we know he's not a strong offensive player. Not that Kessler's a great offensive player, right? But just
There's more
the fact,
upside though.
yeah, exactly, and just the fact that if you're Minnesota, you had him, and he could have been like a Gobert light type of guy, just
Probably
much,
would have fit better with
yeah,
Towns too.
yeah, just much younger and also on a much better contract.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't necessarily have been bound to him the way that they are Gobert. But either way, right? So, Utah has a decent amount of strong, young players, right? You got some decent shooting with some of these guys, right? You got some versatility with the bigs, especially, right? Because again, like, Laurie Markkinen had been a four. Now
Yeah.
he's playing a lot more three, and he's got some ball handling abilities. So he can kind of do that. He's got some creation abilities as well, right? He's in the World Cup, I believe, playing for Finland. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been playing very well, right? So you got some more athletes with John Collins. I guess one weakness I would say probably is more so like I think the guard rotation is a little bit worse than it was when they started last year. 'Cause I think
Really? I
only
don't
because
agree. I don't agree. But
only because
continue.
I think Mike Conley, he was a big part of the reason why they started the year off so strong. Because even though
Sure.
he wasn't putting up big numbers, just the fact that he was kind of like a veteran lead guard, and he was a guy you could kind of go to late in games that could kind of settle things down. Whereas like when you look at Sexton and Clarkson, right, they're more like scoring guards. They're not really going to look to set anybody
Yeah,
up.
they're not facilitators. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. They're more so scorers. And so I think, and then you look at Markkinen, right? Again, he's another guy that's mainly a scorer, not much of a playmaker, right? John Collins, same thing. So that's something that I think, maybe a little bit of a quote unquote concern. But again, like because Utah's in a rebuild, the goal isn't necessarily, to quote unquote all make the playoffs every year, right? They're in a youth movement.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's more. So I guess maybe like the talent, you could argue like right that Sexton is more talented, obviously, than Mike Conley.
At
You
this
know,
point in his career,
at
yeah.
this point in their careers, but it's just in terms of the fit. I think Conley was a better fit. But at the same time, if you're Utah, there was no real point in keeping Mike Conley. So I have no real issues with like what they did. I was just saying
Yeah,
like that
I get
potential.
you.
Yeah, that could be a potential problem, like late in games. Just again because you no longer have like a table setter. But it also again you do have a more dynamic offensive back,
Yeah.
for sure. So that's something you can kind of look at.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then obviously just another weakness, just obviously just comes down to the youth of the roster, right? A lot of
Sure.
young guys. Again, so a lot of again, guys that don't necessarily have like a ton of playoff experience. Some of them do, right? Clarkson's got some. Even was in an NBA Finals, I guess, right? John Collins, right? He's had some playoff experience in Utah.
You mean
I guess,
Atlanta?
yeah,
Yeah.
my
No, you're
Atlanta.
good. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I guess THT a little bit, but not really. For Lakers, he wasn't really a big part of
No.
their playoff rotation. I mean, he was the second year, but that was when LeBron and AD were hurt, so it was kind of more so like we're kind of desperate, so we need to put him out there. He played a little bit in the bubble playoffs. I think there was that random appearance in the Houston series where he kind of came in,
Mm-hmm.
but you wouldn't say he has a lot of playoff experience.
No,
So, I mean,
he's not seasoned.
yeah, exactly. And again, he's very young as well. I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
basically 22. So, I mean, even though he's in what year 4 or 5 at this point, I guess. So, again, you got a lot of young guys on this roster, pretty much at every position.
Yeah.
Um, but just overall, in terms of what I think they're probably going to do, I think they probably will take a step back,
Me too.
record wise, because I think some things definitely went their way early on in the season. Like I said, I think the Conley factor was pretty significant. I think late in games they had, I don't want to say necessarily quote unquote luck, but like they had a lot of things go their way late in games. And I'm not necessarily sure it'll work this time around. Just because again, like a lot of 50-50 games. Um, and then just at the same time, like again, I do think the playmaking factor is going to hurt them, like I said, in crunch time. Because like I mentioned, that's what I was saying, like as a part of why they were decent in crunch time a lot because of Conley just again being kind of like a calming presence, at least for the regular season.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, right? Like, are they going to be upset if they take a step back? Probably not, because
No.
again, you're in a rebuild anyways. Um, so at this point, you're kind of just looking to show the guys that you have the young guys grow, and then are some pieces that you could potentially like pawn off and move at the deadline, kind of like what they did last year, right? I could see some team talking themselves into somebody like a Jordan Clarkson, or maybe like an Olynyk or somebody like that. Um, but either way, like I said, my guess is that they probably take a step back. I mean, they could still compete for a play-in spot, but I don't think they'll get in.
No.
And they didn't get in this year, but again, if they hadn't rested their guys, they might have gotten in. Over a couple of the teams that were playing teams, because again, they were on that trajectory.
But I
Um,
don't even think they needed to or wanted to.
right, exactly. That's why they were doing that, because
Yeah,
they
exactly.
had guys that were just kind of randomly sitting out, for one reason or another when they probably could have played.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas, like you said, I don't think they're going to have as much of a reason to do that this year. So I think that the roster has quote unquote in some ways improved, I guess, just because you've added more young talent. But I think they'll still probably have a worse record,
Mm-hmm.
um, or at the very least, like a similar record where they still probably miss the play in. That's my
Sure.
thought process. I
I
don't know
agree.
about yours. Maybe you agree or disagree, but what do you think?
I mean, like for me, in terms of this roster, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a huge fan of this franchise in general, but looking at this roster, I mean, there's not a lot to really dislike, honestly, which is kind of surprising. Like, you would think with the record that they finished with, we'd be talking about a scrub team, but they're really not bad at all. Like you said, I think, their biggest weakness that can be exploited is definitely their youth, but that's a double-edged sword for me. So I think it could be a huge positive for them, especially down the line. Like, that's one of my favorite things about this roster, I think. And contrary to you, you said that you thought their guard room got weaker. I think it looks a little bit stronger in my opinion. I think Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, that's great. Obviously, that was there last year. And then Horton Tucker was there last year as well. But just adding Keontae George, and then I think Chris Dunn is also on the roster as well. So I think it's deep, and there's definitely potential for them to cook up something special. But in terms of where they're going to finish for me, I think, this might be a hot take, but they might be, closer to the bottom than they were last year. I think they may, end up being where Houston was, because I think Houston's probably going to win a lot more games. Portland may or may not win some more. We'll see. But I think Utah's going to probably lose significantly more considering how strong the West has gotten. I think San Antonio will definitely win more games as well. But I definitely could see this team going closer to the bottom and even further from the play-in. But that's not a problem because of where they are in their, rebuild situation, I guess. But
Right.
in general, I really can't say anything negative about this roster. I pretty much like every player on this squad. There's a lot of versatility. And then you have some young, everybody's just young. Like there's no real, super seasoned veteran or anything like that. I mean, I guess there's a couple, but not to the point where, it's an old head or an OG that's going to be calling shots in the locker room. You know what I mean? But I
Yeah.
think the acquisition of John Collins definitely helps his roster as well, even though we have seen his play kind of deteriorate over the past couple of years, but still a great player nonetheless. Markkanen, he's taken the leap. Walker Kessler looks like a phenomenal, big man as well. So, like I said, there's not a lot to hate. And, I'm on the Utah hype train, honestly, because, I mean, this looks like a decent roster and it has potential to get
Right.
even better, down the line. But for this season, I think they're going to, lose games, but that's not because they're a bad team. That's because the West has gotten significantly better. And a lot of the
Yeah.
teams at the bottom have gotten better.
Yeah, I kind of think, it's kind of funny, even though we do kind of like differ a little bit on the
Hmm.
guard spot at the same time. Like, I think we both kind of feel about the same
Yeah,
in terms of what we think of the team. Where like I
absolutely.
said, I don't think either of us think they'll be, in the play in because, like you said, I think, there's a few other teams, right, that have gotten better, and then it's going to make it harder for, Utah to get to that bottom
Right.
part of the play in, right? Because again, like, the teams that were at the bottom part of the play in last year, right? Those were teams like Oklahoma City, right? New
Hmm.
Orleans. Dallas was right on the outside looking in. They would have been in the play-in had they, not tried to tank.
Yes.
Um, and then like you said, the teams that are in a similar spot to Utah, right? They got a little bit better as well, right? Like Houston probably got better for sure. The Spurs, just by adding the number one pick are probably better, right?
Yeah.
So, then Portland, like you mentioned, they're a team where we don't know what they're going to do, but chances are, regardless of what they do, they're probably still not going to be a playoff team.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what we're looking at here. Because, like you said, there's a lot to like about a lot of the guys on the roster, right? Because, like you mentioned, I like Sexton. I like the guys they drafted. I like Markkanen a lot. Kessler, obviously, as you mentioned, is really good. Ochai Agbaji, I think, is really solid.
Yes.
Just kind of like as an athletic, 3-and-D guard. Um, and again, like you mentioned, I think with THT, obviously, he kind of took a step back, once he got that big contract. But,
Hmm.
again, he's still young. There's still something there. His
There's
issue is
upside.
he's just not a great outside shooter, and that's kind of his problem because there are other things he can do well. Like
Sure.
getting into the paint. He's got long arms, even though he's not like a great defender. But again,
He
like
could
you said,
dribble too. So,
yeah, exactly, and like you said,
he's got
it's
all the
just
tools.
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of youth on the roster, and there's a lot of youth to like. So
Right.
this is a team that I think, even if they don't have a good record, I think there's potential down the line for this team. Like you said, to continue to be good. I think part of, I guess the quote unquote ceiling for this team, like we mentioned, is kind of John Collins. Because again, what version of John Collins are we getting? Are we
Right.
getting the John Collins, from, last season, where again he was, relatively an afterthought, for
It
the
was
most
rough.
part, right? Yeah, exactly. Like last season, 13 points, 6.5 boards, 50% from the field, but like, 29 from three, right? When he had been a pretty solid 3-point shooter right before that, right? 36 the year before, 40 the year before, and then 40 the year before that. On like 3.5 attempts. So that's not nothing.
Right.
Um, so again, the rebounding was down, the
It's a
offense
clear
was down.
regression on all
Yeah,
fronts.
exactly. Yeah, and it's like, age wise, he's 25, going to be 26 going into the season. So you
Right.
just, I'd be kind of surprised, like if last season is just more indicative of what he is. But
He
maybe
was
it
in
is.
trade rumors like every dang week. I think we
Right.
talked about him every week at one point
Yeah.
for a little
And,
bit.
and then eventually, right as we forgot about that, then that's when he gets traded, and he
Yeah.
basically nothing, right? It was
Yeah.
like Rudy Gay, and what, like other expiring contracts?
Mhm.
Basically nothing, right?
Right.
When we were talking about him at the deadline, there was thought, well, maybe he goes for a little bit more, but I think they just ended up waiting a little too long.
Yeah.
So like I said, I think not that the whole season, the success or failure of their season hinges on him. It's not so much that. It's just again
A lot
because
of games can be won if he's at his peak.
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. If he is closer to what he was before last season, right, then all of a sudden that's a steal, in terms of what you gave up, right? Like
Right.
an older Rudy Gay for, John Collins. That's, if you're getting a good version of it. But, we'll
Yes.
see. Because again, like, Utah has taken some of these guys in and have kind of revitalized some of these guys, right?
Mhm.
They marketing, when it looked like, again, I know he was fine in Cleveland, but there was no
People wrote
suggestion.
him off though.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like there was no thought process based off of how he played in Cleveland that, oh, he's going to look like how he looked like last season for
Right.
you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Um, so we'll see. But I do think a lot hinges on that. But
Yeah.
either way,
I
as
think
we've
that
mentioned,
trio, like
yeah,
Laurie Marketing, Colin Sexton, and Jordan Clarkson, like their careers
right,
have kind of been, brought back from the dead, honestly. Not so much Jordan Clarkson. I feel like Jordan Clarkson's always had a
yeah,
decent amount of buzz, and Colin Sexton had, college buzz too, and when he was a rookie. But, in general, it seems like their level of play has definitely gone up since they've been, pretty much the 1, 2, and 3 options.
right. And I think, again, Will Hardy, the coach, I think he's done a pretty phenomenal job. Again,
Yes.
just given the fact that I think he did better than what anybody would have expected. But I
Mm-hmm.
still they'll probably take a step back just because, like you said, the West has gotten better. They got better as well, like, in terms of bringing in some solid young pieces. But either way, like, I don't think that they're, going to be able to win as many games as they did last
Right.
season. I think it'll probably be close to the same. Um, but again, like, they'll probably still be somewhere around that, like you said, 11 to 15 spot. I mean, they're not going to be 15th, but like, they're going to be out of the play in
Yeah,
for sure.
I think they're gonna drop. I think they're gonna be lower than 12. That's all I'm gonna say on it though.
Yeah, they're going to be a bottom five team in the West.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so, I guess, you know, after that, I mean, I guess now what kind of grade would we give the Jazz, for what they did in the offseason? What would you give them? Because again, we went over, the decisions that they made in terms of, who they brought in the draft, right? The trades that they made.
Mhm.
I guess, if maybe you can include Omer Yurt 7. I don't know if I mentioned him, but he was in Miami, but he probably, won't do a whole lot, but
Yeah, I
we'll
don't think
see.
he'll play.
But regardless, yeah, what grade would you give them? Because I think they did a number of things, even if the result ends up not really being like, a good record.
Sure.
But I kind of want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I'm gonna be nice. I'm gonna give them a nice, calm B. I think that's a good grade for them. I think they did stellar in the draft. They picked up some guys that were definitely on our radar for sure. I think Keontae George, great addition. Obviously Taylor Hendricks as well, and then Bryce Sensabaugh, just great picks. I think. And then in free agency, they didn't really do much. They did re-sign Jordan Clarkson. That was a must. And then also acquiring John Collins is definitely better than what, they did last year. So, I think this does make them better. But like you said earlier, not enough to go very far. I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs, probably not the play in as well. And that's just due to the fact that the West got better as well. So don't get it twisted. They did get better, but the West just got better with them.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, like I said, I think a B is pretty fair.
Hmm.
B plus, potentially, just because again, like you said, I liked all the guys that they drafted. Obviously, you could always kind of quibble over like, maybe you should have picked this guy instead of this guy. But
Sure.
I think given what they had, it would have been nice if they had picked like, another point guard. But either way, I think the guys that they had drafted were still fine, right? Like I
Yeah.
think the guys that they picked up, those guys are good players, or they should be good players.
Hmm.
Like you mentioned, the John Collins thing, I like that as a gamble just because, again, you gave up basically nothing to get
Yeah.
him. He pans out, right? You got to steal, potentially the next Stockton Malone. Just kidding. Uh,
Yeah, doubt it.
yeah, but, um, but then outside of that, right? Again, like, there's also, you're also hoping for maybe some internal growth from a couple of guys, right? Like I mentioned, maybe, maybe Walker Kessler takes another step forward, especially
Yeah.
as an offensive player. Maybe like I mentioned, John Collins, does he have a bounce back year, right? Marketing, maybe does he take his game up another level
Yeah.
potentially? Or just again, one of these other young guys. What if THT, kind of finally starts to figure some stuff out, maybe? Colin Sexton, maybe he, adds some more to his game. So, that's kind of an interesting to look out for. But like I said, I'd say a B plus because I think they had a solid offseason.
Yeah, you
Um,
can't be mad at it.
yeah, because again, with the cap space, they weren't going to get anybody. If they
Right.
hadn't traded for Collins, they just, Utah historically doesn't get free agents, right? Even the guys that we mentioned, Stockton and Malone, they drafted them. They didn't, just poach one of those guys over from another team. It's not like Stockton and Malone, left, New Jersey or,
Right.
LA or New York or something to come to Utah. No, they were
Nobody
drafted.
signs in Utah,
Yeah.
and like superstar level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what they've always had to do historically is build through the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And I like what they did. Even marketing they didn't draft, right? They traded for him, but still, like, I like a lot of what they've done here. It's just a matter of do I think that they're going to be, much better than a play-in team? Probably not. Like
No.
you said, I think they're not going to be a play-in team and probably closer to the bottom of the Western Conference. But I think there's a lot to like here. In terms of the guys, it just kind of just again comes down to what do you get out of John Collins, right? Does that end up being a steal? And do you get something else out of some of these other, young guys, that have been on the roster for a little bit, right?
Yep.
Because again, like, THT getting a jump shot, right? That makes a significant difference, in terms of what he is as a player, right?
Right.
John Collins getting his jump shot back, right? That's a significant difference, right? That changes significantly what he is as a player, right?
Yes.
Corey Markkinen, if he can kind of upgrade, as a playmaker, right? That significantly changes, what he is as a player. So
For sure.
there's a lot that can be done here. And I think, with the coaching they have the potential to do a lot of that. But either way, like I said, I'd give them a pretty high mark, for what they did in the offseason. This is definitely of this division, one of the better off seasons for
Yeah.
sure. Because,
They've definitely done a lot.
in terms of the division so far, I think they've had a solid offseason. Like I said, I like their offseason, better than Oklahoma City's, even though I think Oklahoma City will be better. Um, and then obviously, the previous team that we covered, before that, right? Like same thing. Like, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I like a lot of what Utah did. There's a
Yeah.
lot to like. Yeah, I know I keep saying that over and over again, but again, I think they've made some really good moves. Since they've moved on from Mitchell and Gobert, it's pretty much been nothing but, I think really solid moves. There's been a couple of, kind of blaz, right? Because, I think, they could have gotten a little, given what had been rumored about Bogdanovich, right? They didn't really get anything for him. I guess, you got Olynyk, which is fine, but, maybe you would have liked to get a little bit more,
Right.
especially based off how he played last season. Um, and then I guess the Russ trade, like what did they get out of that, right? A bunch of guys that aren't really on the team um, anymore, I guess, right? And then, yeah, it was
Yeah.
just Westbrook,
Yeah.
a bunch of Lakers expirings who are now gone, and then I think guess a future first that's top four protected. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a chance that they get that Laker pick, but then if they don't, right, then so.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like the Mitchell and Gobert trades, they got a lot for those guys, and they have a ton of the other teams' picks as well, right? They have Cleveland's picks, they got Minnesota's picks, so I think again they've been killing it for the most part. I
Yeah.
think
They've
it's
taken a
just
lot of W's.
yeah, it's just a matter of do these young guys that they're bringing in do they continue to pop and do they continue to grow? And that's kind of you know what we're going to be expecting,
Yep.
hopefully.
Yeah.
So now I guess again, just everybody, let us know in the comments what you think, in terms of our thoughts, on the Utah Jazz, in terms of their offseason, again, like maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, because again, like I mean there are some teams, right, where it's like a little bit polarizing, but I think most people probably feel like, Utah had a solid offseason. But
Yeah. I
again,
don't think they're gonna catch a lot of hate for this off season.
maybe right. And again, maybe you agree, maybe you don't. And like I said, again, you look at the over unders, for them, right? I mean, like it, because we've mentioned this before, right? We don't incur, we don't do sports betting, but their over under is about 35 and a half, right? So that's basically slightly worse than they were last year,
Right.
record wise.
It's like
And
at
then
least 13th.
yeah, below them is the Rockets and the Spurs, right? So that basically would put them at 13, which is, a spot lower. So like you said, I think we should expect a step back
Yeah.
in terms of wins, but I do think they will have a step up in terms of talent.
I agree. That's the best way to put it because they did get better,
Yeah,
unarguably.
right. Yeah, so now, not really any real news or rumors right now. We did have one. We had PJ Washington, right, of the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets signed him to an extension, 3 years, 48 million. I think that's pretty good. Again, I think he was one of the last restricted free agents out there for the
Yeah.
most part that hadn't been signed. And we had, there'd been a lot of back and forth, in terms of what he wanted versus what Charlotte wanted to do. I think this is a pretty solid medium.
Yeah.
Because again, like, again, it's not like a ton of money. And it's only 3 years, so that means, relatively soon he'll be back on the free agency market, with another chance to get another contract.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like his only other option, I guess, would be have to take in the qualifying offer. But I think that's too much of a gamble for a player of his caliber.
Right.
Where like if he doesn't have a good season, then he's
He's
gonna
done.
yeah. Well, I mean, not maybe not necessarily done, but he's not getting like a he's
Yeah,
not
not out of the league done,
getting
but like cooked is what I meant. Like
yeah
it would be a
exactly
mistake.
yeah yeah exactly because he's just he's a caliber of player where you just don't know what type of numbers you're gonna get out of him.
Right.
And I think when he plays, he's fine. He's a solid player. I think he can do a lot of things. Right. He's kind of like a stretch big. And he's especially, a guy that Charlotte, sometimes when they go small, they can put out there, because again, he can do some things as a big man, right? Role. He's a decent athlete. He's okay as a shot blocker. I mean, again, he's fine, right? He's not like a great player, but he had a decent season last year. And we'll get into Charlotte soon, but I do think this is a pretty good move for Charlotte, just because again, like he isn't, sort of somewhat a part of their core.
I think he is.
He's a solid player. 25, right? Just recently turned 25. Um, so, again, and he can do a lot of versatile things out there. So I think, there's no real reason to let him walk. And again, for a
Right.
contract like this, I think that's pretty manageable. And again, we'll get to Charlotte, eventually, so we'll talk more about it in detail. But
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty solid contract, for both sides. I like it for, both him and for Charlotte.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, like the way that I'm looking at it is like he's a replaceable player, but at the same time, like you still want to keep that guy around because he does have talent, and I'm happy he did get paid. So shout out to him for that.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so that's pretty much all the news that we got. We had like a little funny thing, I guess, today. I think with one of the Team USA track stars, right? He kind of like
Oh yeah,
yeah, he had like a
interesting comment.
yeah, he had some comments I think about the NBA or the Olympic guys, but again, we don't normally get into the gossipy stuff, but it was kind of like a funny thing.
Well, we might as well talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. We don't normally get into the gossip, but it was kind of a funny event. So, I guess you can kind of like kind of introduce it to us, just to kind of give some background.
Yeah,
Um,
so I believe it was Noah Lyles, I think. Sorry,
yeah,
I don't have the stuff in front of me.
right.
Let me pull it up real quick. So yeah, he said world champion of what? The United States. That was his quote, but the question was basically, why NBA champs call themselves world champs. So it's kind of interesting, and it's like people don't realize the NBA is so global now. Like it's not just the US. Like, if we
Right.
look at it, Luka Doncic is not from the United States and he's a top
No.
player. Giannis, Nikola
Yeah.
Jokic,
Yeah.
we can go on and on. But like the NBA is the pinnacle for basketball worldwide. It's
Right.
not like, we're going to be playing in Taiwan for the NBA championship. No, no, no. It's going to be in the United States. So I think this guy may be a little bit miseducated. I don't know if he was joking or not, but that's just a dumb, asinine statement, in my opinion. Because the way that you have to look at the NBA, like I said, it's a global game now. And even, KJ can attest to that, I'm sure. Like, it's a global game, and we all know this. So I don't understand if this guy was trolling or not.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's weird to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, we mentioned it, with the KJ McDaniels, interview, right? And again, if you haven't checked that out, right, we interviewed, NBA player KJ McDaniels, right? He got to talk a lot about his NBA story, and he was a guy that he's played overseas, and he attested to it. Like, there's a lot of, there are a lot of really good, basketball players, overseas in other countries, right? Like you just mentioned a number of those guys, that are in the NBA now that are superstars. Those guys are not from the U.S.
Right.
They're from all over the world, right? Like you mentioned, Giannis from Greece, Luka from Slovenia, Jokic from Serbia,
And
and
it's
there's others.
nothing new. This is
Yeah,
not new.
yeah, potentially Victor Wembanyama. He's coming over from France.
Exactly.
So I mean, again, like there's a lot, of players that are really good. And again, even the guys that aren't in the NBA, that are pros overseas, they're really good. But
Right.
make no mistake, at the same time, the NBA is the most talented basketball league. In the world.
It's every basketball player's dream worldwide to get to the NBA. I can guarantee you that. And it's like my thing is if it's that big of a deal, like for this guy to be saying this, then like why can't he just tell Denver to play like, I don't know, the Shanghai Sharks or something? That would show you the talent discrepancy there. But
But
that's all I'm really saying.
right, exactly. And again, as we mentioned, there's a lot of great international players and and a
Right.
lot of professionals that aren't in the NBA.
And
They're
it's not
very
to downplay those people who aren't in the NBA.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like they'll come in and they'll still kick the tails, just regular people who come into the
Exactly.
gym. Like we mentioned with the NBA players, even the guys in the NBA who are more like reserves. If they just stepped onto a regular court, they destroy everybody. Like guys that in the NBA where you watch them, and they can't necessarily consistently hit jumpers, but when you watch them play pickup, they're hitting everything.
Right.
So I mean, because again, these guys are the best in the world at what they do. But
Exactly.
like you mentioned, it just at the end of the day, it could just be a funny soundbite, because again, in fairness, I don't know the person,
Me neither that
enough to
well.
know. But and again, like sometimes people just say things, just to kind of like add some viral moments,
Right.
and
I thought he
sometimes
was trolling,
yeah. So, but either
but I
way,
don't know.
yeah. And then
It's
I guess to
interesting.
top it off, right, Team USA, right, they did beat uh whoops. Whoops, I got to start over.
Well,
My bad. I blanked out. I made a mistake, like cuz I have to start over cuz I blanked out on who they beat.
oh, was it
I
Puerto
bet it
Rico?
was
I thought
yeah, no, for the actual first game. It was Brazil. It was
Brazil,
Brazil.
and
Right?
Paolo had like
Or
21,
no,
right?
or no, New Zealand. Not why did I say Brazil? New Zealand.
New
My bad.
Zealand. All right.
Yeah, yeah, let's start. Yeah, so yeah, and again, just a Team USA update. So Team USA did get its first victory over New Zealand, right, led by Paolo Banchero, right? He basically led, the Team USA to the win,
Yeah.
99-72. It was a battle early on, right? Initially, New Zealand had a double-digit lead, but eventually Team USA did pull away, right? Again, led by a lot of the guys, like I mentioned, Boncaro, as well as Tyrese Halliburton and Austin Reeves. It
Mm-hmm.
is kind of interesting, just in terms of like, the guys that have been playing, the big minutes down the stretch, right? Isn't necessarily the guys who have been starting. Um, just because, again, like it's kind of what we've mentioned, in terms of, international basketball, where at the same time, like international basketball is also played differently as well. And some of these guys, who are really, really good, it's not even, not that they're not good here, but it's like, their game may not translate quite as well to international
Right.
basketball.
It's a whole
And for
different set of rules.
yeah, and for some of the guys, like just the role that they're playing is also like a lot different from what they'd be doing, right? Like Brandon Ingram has, it sounds like he's kind of been talking about, his role on the team, and he mentioned, he's happy that they're winning, but he wants to figure out ways he can be effective, because he's kind of been struggling, in multiple ways, right? Because again, not like a great defender, and he's also like primarily a one-on-one scorer, right? He doesn't really play off the ball like that. But then when you have other guys, like Brunson and Edwards, you're just not going to get quite as many ball handling opportunities.
Right.
But like at the same time, for him, right, it probably wouldn't necessarily be a great look to send him, to the bench and have him come off the bench. But
Yeah, or just sit in the corner. I don't know.
right, exactly. So Steve Kerr and Team USA, they do have some things that they're probably going to have to, some things that they're going to have to work out. But either way, it didn't hurt them at all against.
Right. They won.
Again, Boncaro was, just sensational, right? I
Yes.
mean, he pretty much put the team on his back, kind of Edwards-ish style.
Pretty
Um,
much.
in order to get that win. And again, like this is,
That's a
and
second year player, man. He's gonna be special.
yeah, and that's the crazy part. He's in year two. He's entering his second year,
Yeah.
already coming off a really solid rookie campaign. So again, I think with a lot of these young guys, I think the sky's kind of the limit for them in terms of what they can do going
Sure.
into the NBA next season. Because I think a lot of times when you see these young guys in Team USA, it always seems like they end up taking a lot of what they learn, into their regular season stuff and
Yeah.
post, and then they
It
end
really
up being
molds them.
yeah, because we've
Really
seen
cool.
it. We've seen it before where we've seen guys, take leaps, after playing in the Olympics. Not necessarily that the Olympics, genetically changes, the,
And I don't
you know,
even think this is the Olympics. This is the FIBA World Cup, actually, which is
exact.
crazy.
Yeah. So it's just, it's always cool to see because again, like, it gives them more opportunities. It gives them, just more experience and just more, things to do, especially again, late in games down the stretch, having more practice, in situations like that. Because these are important, now they're playing important games where every
Right.
possession, so it's not like, the exhibition games where it doesn't really matter. Now, one mistake that you make late in the game could cost you, right? And then, before you know it, your World Cup, run is over.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see what they continue to do down the stretch. Because even though, again, you don't have like, any top 10 players necessarily, you have some really good players. And I think a lot of the guys, do fit well together. Not
It's a good
everybody.
team.
Yeah, I do think it's a good team. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much it for our, episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know in the comments what you thought, about our take on Utah, and their offseason. Like I said, and like he said, right, we both thought that they had a really solid offseason, just that they probably aren't going to, do a whole lot regular season wise in terms of
Yeah.
win. That's not really the goal for them, as they're in the midst of a rebuild. Um, but either way, we appreciate, the love and support. Again, as we already mentioned, if you haven't checked out, our interview with KJ McDaniels, check that out, right? It's only been up, I believe, at this point for about maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks or
Yep.
so. So, that was a very exciting and very illuminating interview, just,
Very
about,
insightful.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. About, the NBA and just overall basketball experience. Um, so either way, again, thanks for, commenting, liking, and subscribing. We appreciate all the support, and we'll see you Friday.